Hello everybody, thank you for coming to our PILAG event with an external speaker. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Rachel Wickersono. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, which is Korean. Did you say? No? Can't remember what it is. She might want to tell you later. And Rachel is head of languages at York St John. And she's quite a big expert on English as a lingua franca. And she also carries out a very innovative project, which is why we met as a National Teaching Fellowship Award. And we decided we should keep in touch because I was really inspired by what she told me about what she does. So I hope you find this inspiring. I hope the master's students who are here find inspiration for their dissertation, because some of them are still thinking what they could do. Yeah. So thank you for coming, and over to Rachel without much further ado.
Thank you very much, Marina. It's very kind of you to invite me here. If I think this talk is going badly, I just know to shrink to this side and hide behind the computer so I won't be captured on film. Yes, so I'm Rachel, and the pronunciation of my surname is Wickersono, and the way to remember that is this question and answer sequence. What do you say if you see a witch on an axe? The answer is, oh no. It's a witch, axe, oh no. So just imagine me with a witch's hat, and you've got the pronunciation. And it's from Indonesia. It's a Javanese name. Do we have anyone here from Indonesia? Malaysia? No? Okay. It's a Sanskrit word, actually, and I worked for 15 years in Indonesia as a teacher trainer, initially with VSO, Voluntary Services Overseas, in a teacher training college in East Java, and then later as a teacher and teacher trainer again in Jakarta, the capital city of Indonesia, where we ran a CELTA and a DELTA, and I was a CELTA assessor. And I came back to the UK about 10 years ago and started to work at York St John University, where I taught EAP for our international foundation programme. We set up an MA TESOL, so I was head of MA TESOL, and then a couple of years ago I became head of the Languages and Linguistics department. So we have our languages degrees. It's smaller than yours here, with a smaller range of languages, but you might be interested to know that our most popular language is British Sign Language, and our second most popular language is Japanese. And the other languages we teach are French, German, Spanish, a little bit of Mandarin, and a little bit of Italian. So we need to get Marina over to York St John to boost our Italian language
Didn't
teaching.
work here.
Maybe it'll work over there. And in addition to the languages, we teach an undergraduate degree called English Language and Linguistics, and I teach a TESOL module on that degree programme. So we do the whole of TESOL in one module, one third-year module, in 24 hours, and that's what I'm doing this semester. We have an MA, English Language and Linguistics, the MA TESOL we have, and we supervise PhD students. So I've got about 5 PhD students at the moment on various different topics, including topics similar to the ones I want to talk about today. Okay, so most of my career was overseas, as I said, and then about 10 years ago I came back to the UK and started teaching British students for the first time, teaching this TESOL module to large groups of British students here at York St John. And I was very interested to hear my British students interacting with each other. I was very interested to see them interacting with the international students when I put them together in mixed language groups. I was also very interested to read their writing that they submitted for assessment, and listening to them and reading their writing challenged some of the rather fossilised ideas I think that I'd developed as a result of 15 years overseas about what English is. And that's why I started to explore this idea of what English is and how people use English, and I'll talk more about what we might mean by that, to communicate in international situations, in mixed language groups. So I'm going to talk briefly about both of those two things today. I'm going to start with questions about what English is and some possible implications for TESOL. And I hope that'll be interesting for some of you here who are on the TESOL postgraduate degree. And then I'll finish with some implications for internationalising UK universities, where I'll talk about how my students communicate with each other when I put them in these mixed language groups, home students working with international students. So I hope that's okay. I hope that you'll get something out of that. And I'm happy to answer questions, or even ask questions, and answer questions at the end. So please feel free to ask. Okay. So, as I said, I'm going to be talking about the implications of, in my title rather ambitiously, I think I said language, interaction and English as a lingua franca. I'm going to talk about the implications of those things for TESOL and then also for internationalising UK universities, starting with TESOL. Okay, now Marina kindly mentioned some of the online work that I've done, and I'm going to discuss these ideas by showing you some of the online materials that me and a colleague at York St John, Dr. Chris Hall, have developed. Okay, so I'm going to show you the course that we've developed. The name of the course, as you can see on the screen in green, is Changing Englishes. And it's an interactive course which we designed for people like us and like you who teach English to speakers of other languages. It was funded by the British Council and also by York St John University and also by the Higher Education Academy. And the URL is just there on the bottom of the slide. We begin the course by recognising that English is a changing language, and that's nothing new. It's always been changing because it gets changed by its users, and that's nothing different from any other language, but all languages get changed by their users as their users communicate their needs, their identities, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and in doing so they twist, they bend, they invent, they change the linguistic resources that they have at their disposal. And they meet other people with different hopes, fears, dreams, identities, and interact with them, and so exchange linguistic resources with them. So English, like any other language, always has been and still continues to be something that's constantly changing. But because English has spread so far around the world, it has been changed by its users all over the world. And so it's not just changing here, it's changing in many countries. It's being changed by the many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are using it. And at a faster pace than ever before. And of course the internet has contributed to that pace of change. So me and my colleague at York St John were interested in the topic of world Englishes and how English is being used around the world, but we wanted to take seriously the implications of this change for English language teachers. What does it mean for us? What are we teaching? When we came to think about it, and when we thought about our MA TESOL, we thought, we talk a lot about methods, how to teach English. We talk a lot about learning English, so second language acquisition and related topics. But we hardly ever ask, what is this thing called English? That's just taken for granted. It's as if we know what it is and it doesn't need to be discussed. But then we connected what we were doing with world Englishes, with the MA TESOL, and thought, oh no, wait, hang on, there's a gap here. We really need to think a bit more carefully with our colleagues in TESOL and our students on the MA TESOL about our subject. What is this thing called English? And the course that I'm going to show you briefly here was a response to that question. Okay, so I've got a series of screenshots. I know that's not ideal. I just wasn't quite sure if we'd have the internet connection. I'm sorry, I should have checked first, shouldn't I? So I've got screenshots, but you've got the URL if you've copied that down, so you're welcome to go in and have a look at the course. Okay, so the aim of the course is to think through the implications of changing Englishes for English language teachers. It's no longer adequate, we think, to talk about English as if it's a singular. It's no longer adequate. It no longer describes the diversity of uses around the world. So we've designed this course both for experienced and also intending teachers to try and raise awareness of what English is now and to help teachers think through the implications for their own practice. I'll come back to this point, but we don't, and I hope this is not disappointing for you, but we haven't got very many answers. We haven't got very many activities that you can use or ideas for classroom tasks on this course, and that's sometimes disappointing for teachers to hear, because they're always looking for new and exciting materials for their classes. We don't have many of those, but that's because we think that the solution to this problem of what English is will only be found locally in your different contexts, because what English is, the answer to the question what is English, will be specific to your own teaching context. So we hope to ask some questions and to share some data that we've collected and raise awareness, but the actual design of the curriculum, the materials, the tasks is a local job, we think. Okay, the course, we published the course using a Creative Commons license, so that means that anybody can use it, you can share it freely, you can repurpose it. So maybe you like one bit of text or one particular picture, you are allowed to just take that and use it perhaps for a teacher development workshop with colleagues or in a class with students. So it's free to use, but also to repurpose as you see fit in your own context. The idea is that you work through it, it's interactive, there's also an online discussion board that you can contribute to, and we think that if you had the energy, the mental stamina to work through the whole thing, it would take about 5 hours. Okay. Right, so the course has 5 separate units, and here you can just see the images that we've included on the first page of Unit 1, which is called Defining English, and here we ask this question about what English is. We've got 2 pictures there. This one's of the planet, planet Venus, and this one is a galaxy. And the question is, which of these pictures is closer to your concept of what the English language is like? So when you think of English, do you think of it as a planet, or do you think of it as a galaxy? Which one is closer to your concept of English? Can you just turn to the person sitting next to you? You're a 3, aren't you? You're perhaps a 3, and ask the people on your table.
Just to start us off with something easy. Oh, is it? I suppose so. I don't know which foods I can imagine. That's one. Well, it's 100 years old. Really big at stuff.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, if you're working through the course, you would think about the question, and then you can click on the feedback logo there, and there are our suggestions, and you can probably tell from what I've already said that we think it's like a galaxy. we don't think of it like a planet. Because we don't think that English, like a planet, it has a centre. We don't think it's bounded like a planet. And we don't think it's a single object like it's a planet. So we think of it more like a galaxy. Or like grains of sand on a beach. There's no centre, no clear boundaries, but multiple objects that are interacting with each other and constantly being changed and changing each other. So we think it's more like a galaxy. And we've adapted a term from Alistair Pennycook, the critical applied linguist, that we've adapted the word pluralithic. It's not our word, it's his. Pluralithic, to describe our idea of what English is, being like a galaxy. It's pluralithic. And the opposite of pluralithic, a more commonly used word, or still unusual word, but being monolithic. So monolithic ideas about what English is, and pluralithic ideas. And we explain in a little bit more detail what these words mean when we use them. We talk a little bit about the idea of standard English, and I have to put that in inverted commas, and we have done, yeah, thank goodness, on the tab here, standard English. We talk a little bit here about the history of the idea of standard English and the kind of beliefs that people have about standard English. But if you have a background in linguistics, these ideas will be familiar to you. The idea that standard English it's a social, it's a political concept. It has no linguistic reality at all. And that despite that, it's an idea which is held onto very passionately by very, very many people, including many of our students and possibly even many of our colleagues in the staff room. Standard English is even mentioned on the UK English curriculum, as if it is something real. But standard English is just a set of linguistic resources which has been imperfectly described and is considered by society to be a prestigious form of English, considered by society to be a prestigious form of English. So it's a social idea. And those of you, again, with a linguistics background, will know that linguists don't privilege any particular way of communicating. Society does, but linguists don't. But we have to think about this idea of standard English because, as I said, our students will bring it to the class. They will believe in it. They'll think it exists, and they will want it. The course books that we use may support the idea that it exists. So this is a great dilemma for English language teachers who have a linguistics background and know that these ideas are false, but also damaging, potentially damaging, to the people who don't have the linguistic resources considered standard. And that includes our students, of course. And what is more, those linguistic resources considered standard may not be achievable by our students for a number of reasons which, if we've studied second language acquisition, we know. For example, the sounds of standard English may not be achievable if you're older than, say, 7 or 8 years old when you start to learn English. The sounds that our learners will reproduce are influenced by cross-linguistic influence from their other languages and also the kind and amount of input they have in English. So the sounds of standard English just may not be achievable by our students. And there are similar issues around the lexicogrammar of standard English. So we talk about the idea of standard English, how it evolved as a concept and its power as an idea. We also mention that it's a very common idea within English, so it's difficult to resist, and I'll come back to that later on. And we may be using course books or other kinds of materials that support these ideas, so that's difficult. Okay, so that's monolithic versus pluralithic ideas about what English is, the social construction of standard English, and advantages and disadvantages. Advantages being that if we pretend that it exists and that our students are working towards it, they'll be happy and think that we are a good teacher and they're learning very well. So we'll get good marks from our students, and we won't have to worry about finding different materials because the course book is likely to support an idea of standard English. So those are the advantages. The disadvantages are that it doesn't exist and that, frankly, it is not accessible to most of our students. Okay, now this is where the lingua franca bit comes in, because Unit 2 talks about the use of English around the world, and we say that imagine a satellite is launched that can pick up uses of English around the world. What percentage of that use would be between speakers who don't share the same first or even second language, but are using English as a lingua franca? Of course, no one knows the answer to that question because it's not possible to do that. But some people have tried to guess. Do you know roughly what sort of percentage we're talking about of lingua franca usage of English around the world? What sort of percentages are people guessing?
70.
Yeah, 70s. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, well done. Yeah, in the lowish 70s. So anyway, most people using English around the world are using it as a lingua franca to communicate with somebody else who doesn't share any other language with them. So we talk about that. We talk about the idea of native speaker, and again, we're absolutely not the first people in linguistics to question this idea of native speaker. But we talk about native speakers from two points of view. We talk about the variation within the English language use of native speakers, and that can be regional variation. So I enjoyed hearing the announcements in a Birmingham variety of English when I arrived at Birmingham New Street, because that's not what I hear in York. And when I go to Newcastle, it's different again. When I go to Glasgow, I can't understand. Yes, of course, those people are speaking English, and of course they can understand each other. But intelligibility, the ability to understand what another person is saying in the same language, is not inherent in any particular variety, right? So intelligibility is just about familiarity. So the people in Glasgow have no problem. It's fine for them. They understand each other. They speak normally, right, in Glasgow. It's just normal for them. But for me, and for some of you perhaps, if we go there, we can't understand. It's not because Glaswegian English is inherently, in itself, unintelligible. It's just because we're not familiar with it. So we talk about native speaker variation, regional variation, social class related variation, gender, sexuality, and all of those different variables that are part of our identity and therefore part of the way we use languages. And we also talk about accommodation. So when we talk to each other, we accommodate, right? We change the way we speak. The Glaswegians will change the way they speak depending on who they are speaking to. So we haven't just got a single set of linguistic resources, we've got a range, and we select from those depending on the context of the communication. So we talk about variation and accommodation. We talk about world Englishes, and again, these ideas will be familiar to you, but the idea of variation around the world. And we talk about Raj Kachru's famous model of concentric circles, and other ways of thinking about world Englishes. We talk about what it means to own a language, and we reference Henry Widdowson there, that the owners of a language are its users. That's Widdowson. And in contrast we've got a really horrible video of Gordon Brown, the ex-Prime Minister of the UK, on a trip to India and China back in 2006, I think. He makes a speech in India, when he says, "I'm here with a great gift for the people of India, the English language." And you can see him saying that on that video. He's there to give English to the Indian people. Well, English has been in India for generations and generations, right? And it's certainly not Gordon Brown's, who is a Scot anyway, to give to anybody. So two contrasting ideas about owning languages. And we'll talk about intelligibility. So those are the three main topics. We talk about native speaker, to challenge the idea of native speaker, right? Native speaker variation and accommodation. We talk about World Englishes and who is a legitimate user or owner of English. And we talk about English as a lingua franca and intelligibility. Okay. So, Unit 3 is learning English, and this is the longest unit, and I think this is the most complicated of all the units, because here we go into how we learn languages. So this is the SLA, the second language acquisition part of the course. My colleague Chris Hall is a psycholinguist, and I'm more of a sociolinguist. So we look at language acquisition from both of those perspectives. Chris, as a psycholinguist, points out that all of us have a unique set of linguistic resources, our idiolects, our unique set of linguistic resources. And I'm, as a sociolinguist, interested in how we use those to interact with each other. Here's a school timetable. We talk about, and again, this is Widdowson, 2003. English is a language subject at school, a bit like maths. You can learn the rules, right? That's a monolithic idea that there are rules to learn, and if you obey these rules, you will be a good user of English. And Henry Widdowson contrasts this with English as an object language, as a means of communication between different people around the world. And we point out that when we talk about rules, actually rules is an ambiguous word in English, isn't it? And we've done a little bit of corpus linguistics in which we show different ways in which the word rules is used. And it's used to mean both regulations, as in you must do it like this. The present perfect tense is have or has plus the past participle. That's one use of rules. And the other use of rules meaning regularities, patterns within English or any other language. And we talk about learning through usage, that's how learning happens, through use. And there's a lot more in that section if you have time to go and have a look. Okay. Unit 4 is for teachers, where we start to think about the implications of these ideas for teachers. And we have a few suggestions about what these implications might be, but we also encourage you to think about what these ideas might mean for you in your context. If you are allowed to run workshops, for example, for your teachers, you are welcome to use some of the resources, if you like any of them, on this course, to help them think through what English is, who owns it, how it's changing, etc. So we focus on teachers' agency, meaning it has to be up to the teachers. Because English is so widely varied around the world, it's impossible for anybody, any one person to say, this is the right way to speak, write, listen, read, and these are the activities that you need to do to help your students develop those Englishes. It doesn't always mean that we just have to throw everything away. As my students often say, Rachel, what are we going to do? What are we going to do in the classroom? If we can't talk about the present perfect tense, what are we going to do? And so I say, well, you might do the same things, actually. You might continue doing the same things, but you might think about them in a different way. So you might present them, for example, as a regularity. You might do a bit of corpus linguistics to show this regularity, but you won't be prescriptive. You won't say it's a rule. You won't say you have to do it like this. So you might do the same things, but just reframe them, represent them in a different way. And then, of course, you probably want to bring in lots of variety of listening texts from speakers of English around the world, or at least in the places where your students might encounter other speakers. And finally, Unit 5, we just say this is a huge task because TESOL, I think, hasn't really seriously considered what English is. If we are interested in any of these ideas and do want to try and use them in the class, there'll be resistance. There may be resistance from students, from colleagues, from your managers, etc., who have different ideas. Now I'm going back in time now, because actually this bit for me in terms of my research came first before the Changing Englishes course. This was the bit where I started to really listen to my students interacting in English in class, in mixed groups, so home students and international students. And one thing I noticed was that the international students who were on a foundation programme because their English was not good enough to get on to the first year of an undergraduate degree, those students were brilliant at interacting in English as a lingua franca, in mixed language groups. And my home students were terrible, really terrible. And I just want to show you a little example. Okay, so just a tiny example. O is Ollie. Ollie is a British third year student of linguistics, and S is Stavros. Stavros is from Greece, and Stavros was on the International Foundation programme because his English was not good enough to go onto the first year of a business management programme. So fingers crossed.
It's open in the background, though, so you should be able to...
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
What parts of like your lessons have you enjoyed doing with Rachel? What parts of your foundation program have you enjoyed doing with Rachel?
I don't have Rachel.
Oh, you don't? Oh, right. So what lessons are you doing?
Yeah.
What parts of like your lessons have you enjoyed doing with Rachel? What parts of your foundation program have you enjoyed doing with Rachel?
I don't have Rachel.
Oh, you don't? Oh, right. So what lessons are you doing?
Okay. So Ollie makes an assumption that I am Stavros's teacher, and I wasn't teaching Stavros at the time, it was somebody else. And Stavros's response to Ollie's first question is, Ollie reads that as a problem of understanding, a problem of English on Stavros's part. Look what he does. What parts of like your lessons? Here's Ollie's second attempt. What parts of your same he's repeated it. Your that's a lip smack. Pause for a second. Foundation program. So Ollie's switched lesson with foundation program. So Ollie's diagnosis is there's something wrong with Stavros's English. In fact, it's just that Ollie's made an assumption which turns out to be incorrect. Now, what I saw a lot in my data was this kind of thing, and more like this, in that when my British students asked a question of the international students, they often use these very long extended question sequences. So they would ask a question, there'd be a micro pause or no pause, and they'd ask the question again, and sometimes again, with changed words or with the same words. And often the response for the international students was exactly as Stavros, Is that one question? Is it two questions? Is it three questions? What are you doing? Right. But it was read, it was understood as there's something wrong with your English. Okay, so that was really surprising for me, coming back from teaching English for so many years, to find that one of the problems was with the so-called native speakers. That their awareness of what English as a lingua franca is and how it gets used in mixed groups was poor, was really poor. And I started to think that they needed some English language teaching. Not Stavros. Ollie needs it. So, together with Ollie and Stavros, I created this online course, and the link was on the previous slide. And it's a very simple activity, it's an idea for an activity, but Ollie and Stavros had a conversation, they recorded it, they transcribed. So they did this transcription, they transcribed a small part of the talk, and then they looked at the transcription. Okay? And it was to try and get away from whose fault is it? Why do we misunderstand? It was to try and focus them on the features of their talk and the effects of those features. Okay, so I wanted them to just describe, identify features like repetition, like pause, like overlap, and then think, okay, it's there, what is the effect of that, the interactional effect of that feature on our dialogue, on our conversation. And this is Ollie and Stavros. Let's see if this one works. This is Ollie and Stavros discussing that small piece of transcript. That's Ollie on the left and Stavros on the right. Oops. Sorry. Just bear with me a minute, sorry.
So, in line 3, when Stavros...
yeah, I think when I said, it's like, okay, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It was like not understanding the sentence. So you try to change it again. Well, I'm thinking, what happened? You try to change it again, and you, instead of lessons, which is a very simple word, you put foundation program, which is like more complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in trying again, I've actually opted for it's kind of a lexical item, which I thought was the trouble source, that he didn't understand lessons, and actually, opted for something which was even more kind of obscure and a lower frequency word, which just seems totally to the course.